Okay, with that start, let's go on and talk now about care economies and caring democracies. How might caring economies mitigate against bad care? And why does a political framing of caring democracies become an essential part of caring economies? That's the question we'll take up now. And first, I want to praise caring economies by distinguishing them from the care economy. And then I want to use an example to illustrate this point, and then turn to the necessity for politics here. So let's begin by talking about the language that's used in UN documents and in ILO documents, the care economy. To me, the care economy already signals that we're living in the world of Mr. Homo economicus. Now, this language shows up in the UN and in ILO. The problem with the care economy in the singular is that it starts from the same starting point of economic life and presumes that economic life should be the model for human behavior and institutions in all fields. I learned from this lesson especially from Karl Polanyi in his book, The Great Transformation. It is only in this very strange modern world since about the middle of the 18th century that economy has come to dominate politics. Before that, economic judgments were always made in the service of some political ends. Let me give you an example. The ILO in 2024 adopted a resolution concerning decent work in the care economy. Now, let me begin by saying I absolutely agree with everything that they said in that resolution about policies. That is, people should have family time off to care. People should have decent wages for the kinds of care work that they do. We should acknowledge that unpaid care work is as important as care work. However, here's the language that they use. Point one. Care work, paid and unpaid, is essential to all other work. What happens when we reduce care to a sector of the economy? The care economy continues to view humans and their activity in primarily economic terms. And if we view the care economy as a kind of a logistics, as a support for other economic activity, how does this affect our understanding of care and of its possible importance in the world? It makes care functional to the support of other work. In a way, this statement, which echoes claims made by care workers themselves as they demand higher wages and better working conditions, is at the heart of the problem. We could alternately state, were there no need for care, there would be no need for work. Therefore, all other work is essential to care. The difference is, of course, about the hierarchy of values that's being maintained here. In an economy in which people are labor, the rest of life becomes a backdrop by which people are made into the productive commodity called labor, that is, through a process of reproduction. And part of the reason I don't like this language of social reproduction that much is because it follows the same logic of making labor and production the first thing, and reproduction, quite literally, something that comes after it. So an extreme example of this is, I'm going to go back to our dear friend Mark Zuckerberg. There's a little red book that gets handed to every person who works at Facebook, according to Sarah Wynne Williams in her book, Careless People. And this is a quotation from the Little Red Book. I'm old enough to remember when the Little Red Book was moused, but never mind. Our philosophy on perks is that we want to provide services that are utilitarian and help people with things they need in order to help them focus on our long-term goals. Everyone needs to eat, everyone needs to do laundry, everyone needs health services, everyone needs to get to work. If we can make these parts of our lives easier, then it helps us focus on what we're trying to accomplish at work, and it makes us all more productive. So it's not that they're trying to be nice to their workers. It's that they think if they do this, they will be able to get more out of them. So in this version of the care economy, care exists to increase productivity in other, presumably more productive spheres of activity. Now, it's not unusual to say that some things are functional, but we should perhaps pause for a moment to notice that um, within the Western tradition, as long ago as Susan Oken noted, women are viewed as functional and men are viewed as somehow essential. As Oken put it, the philosophers always ask, what are men like? What is their nature? And what are women for? And if you start from that distinction, you are going to end up with inequality. And it's the same thing here about function. Now, of course, we could say that care is always functional. Here's the famous definition of care that Berenice Fisher and I devised back in 1990. On the most general level, we suggest that caring be viewed as a species activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. Yeah, you know this, right? Um, but there's a difference between this kind of functioning, isn't there? To maintain, continue, and repair the world so that we can live in it as well as possible, which is a different goal from care work is essential to all other work. So, to conclude this point, using this language of the care economy and viewing care as a sphere of or a sector of the global political economy leaves it within the Homo economicus model. It doesn't change that. And well, all of the accomplishments, and they really have been extraordinary accomplishments in the last 50 years, to make the work of women count more and to make care work count more, it's still always going to be behind because of the way this is structured economically. So here's the contrast. In contrast, care economies, I think, are aiming at homines curans. By the way, the Latin here is not made up. I didn't make it up. It's actually from Albert the Great, who called humans creatures of care. So this phrase, care economies in the plural, was first used by Rian Eisler in 2007. And the other person whose work I've found it in the most is, of course, Kelly herself, Kelly Dombrowski. To speak of the plural of economies is to recognize that economies can pursue goals other than the singular pursuit of profit, that multiple ends can be pursued, and among those ends can be the end of caring well. In this way, caring economies further the economic interests of homines curans, caring humans, rather than solely the profit-seeking homo economicus, economic man. Now, others have pointed to this existence of alternative economies, such as commoning and bartering, going back to J.K. Gibson Graham's work, and to alternative care infrastructures that people are talking about. For example, Zabatos Campos has just published a piece about community refrigerators. What caring economies require and what distinguishes them is a feedback loop to assess the caring effects of economic policies, as well as the fiscal or economic effects of those policies. Rather than asking, is this profitable? Have we got all the value that we can out of it economically? We can ask other questions. And it's possible to assess the caring effects of economic policies, and they require that we have a plurality of economic ends, not just the maximization of profits, which guides human life, including economic life. Consider this humble example. If factories did not have to build safeguards to protect worker safety, they could certainly operate more cheaply. But we've decided, as citizens, to insert the value of worker safety into the economies of running factories. What would happen if we were to insert the value of caring into all of our economic activities? And perhaps one way to do that would be to insist that we have care impact statements for proposals. In fact, a given proposal might not maximize profit, but we might ask the question, how do we measure, and this is the work for you guys who are economists, how do we measure, assess, and make sense of such alternatives? As I was thinking about this, I thought about bourgeois virtues who've been championed by such supporters of capitalism as Deirdre McCloskey. McCloskey makes the argument that there's some virtues that really are worth celebrating that come out of the bourgeoisie and capitalism. For example, thriftiness. Well, thriftiness is a nice value and it does lead to greater profit, but it can also be recast as avoiding waste. And if we think of it as avoiding waste, it's surely a value of caring for people and the earth, but it goes far beyond a concern with profit. And in fact, we might decide that being thrifty, which leads to greater profit, we have to be more thrifty. We have to actually be not wasteful, which would be actually better not only for maybe the bottom line, but certainly for the planet and for people. So caring economies can generate, and this is the work we have to do, can generate such an alternative framework of caring values and then figure out ways to measure whether or not those caring values are actually working. This sounded very abstract to me, so I decided to try to think of an example. And so let me turn now to an example. An example that's actually been very interesting to me for some time is the example of school lunches. And I say this because when I lived in Minnesota, kids who were poor got a discount on the price of their school lunch. But if their parents, for one reason or another, hadn't paid the $6 to the school every week, and it had to be done every week, if they didn't do that, they got, instead of getting a nice hot lunch, they got a cheese sandwich, 2 pieces of bread with some cheese slapped between them. And you can imagine what this did to the kids. It made them miserable because it was humiliating to be given this alternate lunch because your parents hadn't paid the $6. The governor of Minnesota and the legislature in Minnesota passed a law that said all children would receive free lunch and free breakfast every day of the school year. So think about this example. Because in New Zealand, as I understand it, the policies about school lunches have also been contentious. There was a school lunch program, the conservative government came in and changed it, and now it's set to expire next year, regardless of what happens. So the new government decided to use economies of scale to deliver cheaper meals by awarding a large contract to one main provider rather than allowing schools that qualified to provide their own lunches. Associate Education Minister David Seymour considered that $130 million was saved in this, his language, smarter program. Others saw many losses to this school lunch program. When a 2023 Treasury report had found that school lunch programs help children get more nutrition, they said it didn't necessarily improve educational outcomes. And therefore, it was kind of a bad investment because it wasn't really, oh my God, kids were getting food, and they were doing better because they were eating better, but it wasn't necessarily improving school outcomes. But not everyone agrees with this view about school outcomes. Here is a principal from Titipunga High School up in the North Island. Principal Emma Leyland put it this way: attendance has improved, achievement has improved, behavior has improved, and of course, relationships have improved. Staff sit and eat with the children and practice relationship building, which is really important to us. On the other hand, and according to the reporter, the students enjoyed the lunches. They showed gratitude towards the staff who made the lunches, and the shy kids did not feel embarrassed to eat in front of their classmates. Think how important that is. On the other hand, afterwards, Principal Aisha Burns at Lincoln Heights School wrote this, you know, we're back to seeing kids going, actually, I don't want to be the child that's taking a lunch. So the new lunch is all, this fast food stuff prepared in microwavable containers. And the kids make fun of it because it's bad. And so the kids who actually really need to eat this food because it's the only food they're going to get maybe all day don't want to look stupid in front of the other kids. And so they turn it down. They say, I don't want to eat that lunch. And so the kids are going hungry because the food lunches are just not edible. So in his press release, Seymour had complained that 10,000 lunches were going uneaten each day, though many uneaten meals were turned over to the community to feed farm animals or to feed the community itself. But a recent report shows that in March and April 2025, the problem of waste persists. 17,400 meals were uneaten in Northland schools. And so you see this comment. We know that kids are actually going hungry because they don't want to be seen as taking a lunch. So now let me return briefly to the criteria I suggested to think about whether a policy is offering good or bad care. Perhaps we should be more nuanced and say better care or not. And we might evaluate this policy this way. So if the goal was to make the program cheaper, it succeeded, right? On the other hand, let us return to the criteria I introduced earlier and think about the lunch program through it. Mitigate, reduce harm. How many children are eating the meals? How much food waste is there? Well, the evidence is that, in fact, not all the children are eating the food and the level of waste remains. Promote flourishing. Are the meals good? Are the staff still sitting down with the children to eat the meals off of plates? Is educational achievement affected? Does the school feel like a part of the community? Do the people feel grateful? Do the children feel grateful for the meals? Or do they feel as if they're a problem that has to be solved? Time. Do fast food prepared meals offset the experience of sitting in real time to eat meals prepared by an on-site staff? Are mealtimes something to get through or an occasion for community? And that's really the kind of question that we ask about care all the time, and care and time, always. Anti-hierarchical. So, how do you overcome the stigma of being the student who needs to eat the school lunch? What happens to your sense of equality, of dignity, of gratitude under these circumstances? And does this produce vicious or virtuous circles of care? I'll quote Principal Leisha Burns again. Since voicing concerns about issues with the school lunch, Burns said she was getting feedback that her kids were simply ungrateful. To that, she has this message. Our children in our community are very grateful, and they are also taxpayers. The children that we are nurturing will go on to be taxpayers. If we invest in this now, the likelihood is that as a nation, we will be stronger because we will have children who understand the importance of investing in people who are vulnerable. So if we go back to this question of democratic, it's a really interesting question. Is it better to have a national food company making decisions about what to serve for school lunch? Or is it better to give this decision back to the people in the locality who are familiar with the needs and tastes of the people in the community, who can hire people to do the work, who can feed the community with leftover meals, who can feed the pigs and the farm? And how can an education minister say that he knows what the taxpayers want, when in fact some taxpayers probably do want this alternative frame for lunch? Sorry. Wait, I've lost my page. Well, Kelly, you lost your introduction. Now I've lost my page. Let me see. Where did it go? Here it is. So I'm afraid it's too obvious what I would say as the model of providing locally prepared, culturally sensitive, community involving, gratitude inducing, common meals sensitive to diverse food practices for everyone in the school. That's a better choice. So, in short, caring economies require that economic judgments take place in a context of a plurality of values and points of view. And they're less likely to become bad care, these decisions, when we do it this way and when we think about these questions. Note the benefits beyond the cash: less wasted food, more connection with the community, more local jobs, less stigma, better relationships. But caring economies are not enough, and so you'll allow me a few minutes to insist upon this point as well. Then our question becomes how to make such decisions about which other values to insert in our thinking. Now, experts can offer their views and provide sophisticated analyses of what it's like and what's happening in an economy when care-friendly policies are adopted. For example, Karakan in Turkey recently did a study that demonstrated that increased spending in early childhood care and education is a way to improve the quality of the economy overall. But at some point, there are always going to be value judgments unless we simply stick with the idea that what's profitable or returns on investment more is what we're going to be considering. Now we return to the question of these shifting moral understandings, to use Walker's language, and the powers that be, and the powers that could be to make these decisions. Who should make these decisions about values and how? Walker's transparency test suggests that every affected position, every story, every possible outcome, every person who's affected, either as caregiver or care receiver, needs to be included. The point is that we need to create political institutions that match our commitments to care, to force economic judgments that get it right by recognizing that there are other values that we need to enforce as well. Electing someone every once in a while is not how citizens need to be engaged in public discussion and decision making.